The static started at 2:43 a.m. It wasn't radio static. It sounded like wet gravel being turned over with a shovel. The radio in the galley wasn't supposed to work. I'd unplugged it months ago after the salt got into the dials and made it scream in the middle of the night. But when I looked over, the red power light was on. Then a voice came through. Found them in the crawl space. 3 of them. Still holding hands. The tide is coming in, Jacob. My name is Jacob. I hadn't spoken to anyone in 6 weeks. I live in a lighthouse on the edge of a jagged tooth of rock called Bishop's Reach. It's an automated station now, which means I'm not here to trim wicks or carry oil. I'm here to make sure the software doesn't glitch and to keep the lens clean. It's a job for the lonely, the hiding, or the haunted. I happen to be all 3. The radio in the galley shouldn't have been on. I'd unplugged it months ago because the salt air kept corroding the dials, causing it to scream at odd hours. Yet, as I sat there in the dark, shivering in a thick wool sweater, the red power light glowed like a predatory eye. Found them in the crawl space. A voice hissed through the grit of the frequency. It was thin, like paper tearing. 3 of them. Still holding hands. The tide is coming in, Jacob. I approached the radio, my boots thudding softly on the cold iron floor. The air in the room had turned frigid, smelling of old brine and something metallic, copper, like blood. I reached for the knob to kill the power, but my hand froze. Don't look at the glass, the voice whispered. It sounded closer now, as if the person were standing right behind the mesh of the speaker. If you look at the glass, the light can see you. And if the light can see you, it can come inside. I looked up. The lighthouse lantern was rotating above me, casting its rhythmic, sweeping beam across the churning Atlantic. Every few seconds, a blinding bar of white light cut through the kitchen window, illuminating the grime on the panes before plunging me back into shadow. I told myself it was a stray signal, a fluke of atmospheric pressure bouncing a decades-old broadcast off the ionosphere. But then, the rhythm changed. The light stopped rotating. The beam stayed fixed, pointed directly out toward the great kelp forest, a graveyard of ships a mile offshore. And then, slowly, the great lamp began to tilt. It wasn't supposed to move vertically. The machinery groaned, a sound of metal screaming against metal that vibrated through the very marrow of my bones. The light lowered until it was pointed down, illuminating the base of the tower and the narrow, slippery stone stairs that led to the water's edge. In the center of that white circle of light, something was climbing. It looked like a man, but the proportions were wrong. Its arms were too long, the elbows hinging in ways that suggested no bone lived beneath the skin. It was slick, coated in a thick, translucent slime that shimmered under the halogen glare. It dragged something behind it, a heavy, rusted chain that clinked against the rock. I backed away from the window, my heart hammering a frantic rhythm against my ribs. I scrambled for my flashlight, the beam shaking as I swept it around the room. "He's at the door, Jacob," the radio croaked. "He's brought the salt. He's brought the dark." A heavy thud echoed from the bottom of the tower. then a wet, sliding sound. I bolted for the spiral staircase, racing upward toward the lantern room. It was the only place with a lock. My breath came in ragged gasps, the cold air stinging my lungs. I reached the top, slammed the heavy iron door shut, and threw the bolt. I stood in the center of the glass dome, surrounded by the night. The ocean was a black, heaving mass. Below, I could hear the thing. It wasn't using the stairs. It was scaling the outside of the tower. I could hear its long, wet fingers find purchase in the cracks of the masonry. I looked at the great Fresnel lens. It was silent now, the light extinguished. In the sudden darkness, the reflection in the glass showed me the room behind me. But it wasn't my reflection. In the glass, I saw a man standing in the center of the lantern room. He looked like me, wore my clothes, held my flashlight. But his eyes were gone, replaced by two glowing white orbs that mirrored the lighthouse beam. Behind him, the iron door I had just locked was wide open. I spun around. The door was still shut. The room was empty. I looked back at the glass. In the reflection, the door was open, and the thing from the sea was stepping into the room. It was towering, 7 feet of translucent, weeping flesh. It leaned over the me in the glass and whispered into my ear. The sound didn't come from the room. It came from inside my own skull. "The light doesn't keep the monsters away, Jacob." The voice of the radio, now clear and booming, filled my mind. "The light is what calls them. It's a dinner bell." The reflection of the monster reached out and grabbed the reflection of my throat. I felt the cold, wet pressure manifest on my real skin. I couldn't breathe. I clawed at the air, but there was nothing there to grab, only the phantom grip tightening from a world inside the mirror. My vision began to blur. The last thing I saw before the darkness took me wasn't the monster. It was the horizon. Dozens of lights were appearing on the surface of the water. Not ships, not stars. They were rising from the depths, hundreds of glowing white eyes, all turning toward the tower. The tide was coming in, and I was finally being served.